Coming up, the New York Times this week reported that it feels as if Boris Johnson's Britain is finally sinking giggling into the sea after 12 years of Tory chaos and mismanagement. Perhaps the electorate are finally waking up to the corruption, incompetence and malign intent of this government, judging by the pasting they received in the two by-elections this week at least. We can only hope. Because new analysis by the Centre for European Reform shows that the bill for Boris Johnson's Brexit deal is running into the billions of pounds, with UK output now 5.2% or £31 billion below where it would have been if the UK had not left the European Union. More than enough to provide for inflation-matching pay rises across all sectors. And yes, as the government keeps telling us, it is difficult to disentangle the effects of Brexit and Covid, but it's not impossible using OECD data alongside statistics from the UK's own Office of National Statistics. Other countries experienced Covid, but only Britain suffered Brexit. The UK had a particularly deep recession in 2020, but as we ended Covid restrictions sooner than many other similar countries, that should have made our recovery from Covid faster than other countries, not slower. And with zero growth forecast for next year, placing us 19th out of the G20 group of the world's largest economies, just above Russia, the most plausible explanation is Brexit. If you enjoy this video, please like and share using the buttons below. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do, and you can then click the bell to be alerted to my new videos and have the option of hitting the thanks icon to make a small contribution towards my research and production costs, but only if you can afford it and only if you really want to. Even before the pandemic, UK economic growth was down 2.9% from where it would have been had the UK not left the EU. Investment also began to lag right from the very moment of the referendum result, and trading figures for goods began to lag as soon as the UK left the single market. Future growth in productivity and an increase in living standards are both dependent on investment that is made right now. And since Brexit, investment in the UK economy has been way below what's needed to improve economic productivity and provide improved living standards for the UK population. But when I've watched or listened to the BBC or ITV, it's like Brexit has been the elephant in the room for the last few years. Politicians from both the main parties seem to have trouble even mentioning the word. But I have seen signs of this changing in the past week or two, with ITV joining Channel 4 and being a bit more honest about the central role that Brexit has in the UK's current economic problems. And yes, I'm sure we all understand that the cost of living crisis is not caused solely by Brexit, and that with the war in Ukraine, the problems in the supply chain are not solely down to Brexit. But Brexit has made these problems a lot worse. Do you remember those sunny uplands we were promised back in 2016? Unicorns crapping out rainbows, sovereignty times 1 billion and dipped in chocolate. Boris Johnson's explicit manifesto pledges not to raise income tax, VAT or national insurance for 5 years after Brexit. Since then, Tory taxation levels on working people have now reached the highest rates in my lifetime. It's just hilarious how the Tories position themselves as the party of low taxation. What a damning indictment of the notion of austerity as being a solution to our economic woes. The 12 years of savage cuts to public services has put the NHS on its knees, degraded the justice system so it's no longer fit for purpose, seen more food banks set up in the UK than there are branches of McDonald's, with 1 in 5 children growing up in poverty and literally millions of households having to choose between heating and eating last winter, and again this. Austerity has led to all that and landed us with a tax burden that has been made even worse by Brexit. Brexit is the main reason why Chancellor Rishi Sunak raised taxes. He claimed that his increase in national insurance contributions was needed to fund the health service and social care. But this tax on working people's income would not have been needed if the UK had stayed in the EU, or even if we'd stayed within the single market and customs union. The tax hikes have raised less money than what Brexit has so far cost this country. £29 billion raised towards the £31 billion cost of Brexit so far. You could say this was a wholly Brexit tax. And it's not just the Brexit tax burden that is affecting the cost of living crisis, it's also inflation, of course. Granted, inflation is currently a global problem, but in Brexit Britain, it's so much worse than the global average, and so much worse than it would have been following a Remain vote in 2016. The independent Resolution Foundation think tank, working alongside experts from the London School of Economics, say Britain's cost of living crisis is being made worse by Brexit dragging down the country's growth potential and leading to the average worker in Britain being on course to suffer more than £470 in lost pay each year by 2030. 6 years on from the referendum, the researchers said Brexit was damaging the competitiveness of UK exports on the world stage, with a less open Great Britain expecting to be poorer and less productive. Following the rail workers' current industrial action, Boris Johnson is warning workers against demanding inflation-matching pay rises, or in other words, demanding not to have their pay cut in real terms, to prevent a 1970s-style wage price spiral. So much for Johnson's predictions of Brexit creating a high-wage, high-productivity economy. He himself is now demanding a low-wage, and by implication a low-productivity, economy. And not only that, but we already know that current runaway inflation is not caused by workers' pay, but is caused by landlords hiking rent, companies, including the rail operators, profiteering and handing out massive dividends to shareholders, while at the same time cutting real wages and worsening employee terms and conditions. It's almost like not so much a 1970s-style wage price spiral as class warfare, with working people expected to make sacrifices to their living standards, while companies raise prices to increase profits. We see echoes of this also, where landlords are able to raise rent beyond inflation due to the ever-diminishing housing stock in the UK under this government. Wherever you look, government policy seems to be to shift wealth away from working people and into the pockets of landlords and shareholders. The government says that bigger pay rises for UK workers would only be sustainable if backed by productivity gains. Their way of saying they see protecting profits for shareholders as being far more important than wage levels. That's what I mean by it being almost a kind of class warfare. Meanwhile, these same London School of Economics academics have said that the government's argument that Brexit will help it to level up the economy to boost prosperity outside London and the South East is just not true, finding instead that the northeast of England, ironically one of the Leave voting strongholds, will be the hardest hit by leaving the EU. Add to that the new constraints imposed on the economy and trade by Brexit, and you do wonder whether the current RMT strikes are just a taste of what's to come in the coming months, as unions from other sectors like teaching and nursing are now openly discussing industrial action to restore their real pay rates to pre-austerity levels. Nurses, for example, are looking to restore a real terms 8% pay cut since Cameron first imposed austerity policies on the public sector, and however much the Tories try to somehow blame Keir Starmer for industrial unrest, it's clear it's their own policies of austerity, Brexit and pay caps that have led to this febrile atmosphere of division and conflict that has worsened as far back as Cameron becoming Prime Minister in 2010. But it's not just working people that are suffering. According to research by Pam Muir-Gordon, the valuation of companies on the FTSE All-Share Index has settled at a 20% discount to the rest of the world since the Brexit vote 6 years ago. So it seems it's not as simple as some sort of Marxist class war, because it's capital as well as labour that is suffering through Brexit and this populist government's policies. But on a more prosaic note, it's not often my research for these videos takes me into the pages of the Grocer magazine, but one article recently did catch my eye. The article says that seasonal worker shortages of up to 75% have been reported in some parts of the UK, sparking fears there will not be enough labour available to pick crops this year. One source told the grocer the shortages had been driven by delays in the processing of visas, leaving some producers with just 25% of the workers they had originally booked in for harvest. With Julian Marks of global food and farming company Barfoot's saying that securing labour was an ongoing challenge and getting pretty desperate. Promises from government over additional visas had not been kept. A government spokesman from the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, said they were working towards attracting UK workers to the sector. But where they got the idea that somewhere in the UK there exist hordes of hard-working people who want to come and pick fruit and veg, I'm not sure. They really don't. Which is why those seasonal EU workers are so sorely missed, and why there continues to be shortages on the shelves. My own shopping order this very week is missing quite a few items. That was unheard of before Brexit, but now I'm getting used to it. It's become the norm. Oh well, at least we only have Brexit to worry about. It's not as if we have a cost of living crisis, a creaking NHS with people dying while waiting for an ambulance, a justice system that is not fit for purpose, rising levels of sexual and violent crime, the emotional trauma of suffering one of the highest per capita death rates in the world from COVID, rampant corruption or government law breaking, attacks on our human rights, including the right to protest or report on leaked government information. It's not as if we're swimming in faeces and polio viruses in our rivers and coastal waters, or as if there are 1 in 10 parents having to use food banks to feed their children in one of the richest countries in the world, and our global reputation as a tolerant nation being destroyed with the performative cruelty of the government's Rwanda people trafficking policy. Because remember, Boris Johnson got all the big calls right.